Yeah, and it looks like, Lucas, we were just getting that breaking news. Brett had referenced that there is a video out on Instagram, a short video message from President Zelensky. A little bit of translation. He talks about this. He says, Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbass, carried out strikes on our military infrastructure and border guards. Explosions have been heard in many cities in Ukraine. He says we impose martial law throughout Ukraine. So, Lucas, that now coming into us, a bit of breaking news. We will check back with you as we now look and watch the highways and byways in and out of Kyiv now just absolutely jammed with cars and those who are trying to get to safety as continued explosions are heard there. We'll check back with Lucas. We'll check back with Steve Harrigan, who's in Kyiv on the ground as well. But we want to do this. Let's check in now on lawmaker reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine pouring in tonight. White House correspondent Kevin Corke is monitoring that side of the story because these people are potentially... Oh, hold on one second. Okay, hold on. We're going to check in first with Trey Yingst, who is there on the ground. Trey, give us an update there as dawn is now upon you.
Guys, we just heard air raid sirens going off. You can hear them right now. Air raid sirens are going off in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, indicating there are likely some incoming Russian strikes set to take place. This is the first time we have heard these sirens since war erupted between Ukraine and Russia. Earlier in the night, there were at least 36 strikes taking place in different locations around Kyiv. According to officials that we've talked to, these strikes were targeting military barracks outside of the city and also other key infrastructure around the Ukrainian capital. It is not just Kyiv that is under attack. The second largest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv, cities like Odessa and Mariupol in the south, taking fire from Russian forces. And we also understand that that amphibious assault that my colleague Lucas Tomlinson talked about is underway at this hour. Make no mistake, this is a full-scale Russian invasion into Ukraine happening right now, and the air raid sirens going off in the Ukrainian capital as we speak. Shannon.
All right, Trey Yingst doing an amazing job there, reporting around the clock for us. Air raid sirens mingled in with church bells, with explosions as well. And Trey, what is your sense? We see this message from the president President Zelensky saying, you know, if you can, try to stay home. We've got this. The Army knows how to do this. The defense sector is working. He's declared martial law officially there in the country. Any sense that the people, we see, we've got a live picture here of the jammed up highways of people looking like they're trying to leave.
Take the truck up, yeah.
But Trey, any sense of the streets there, the interior of the city, of whether people are heeding the warnings of the president to stay home and allow the military to do the work?
We do know at this hour, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has introduced martial law across Ukraine. We saw a message go out from the mayor of Kyiv urging people to stay home. Some of the stories of Ukrainian civilians that are already coming out online, harrowing. You hear these stories of children in the basements of houses, basically trying to use them as bunkers. We also know that a lot of the different locations across the city have opened up their bomb shelters, including the metro system here in Kyiv, so that if there are civilians out in the streets, when these sirens go off and when the raids start, they can go underground. The thing to remember here is that this city was prepared for this to happen, but the understanding that it would take place really hadn't set in until the past 48 hours. We heard President Zelensky, even when we spoke with him just about a week and a half ago, basically saying he disagreed with the U.S. intel about the possibility of a full-scale invasion. He was trying to keep the people here calm. But tonight, it was very clear when he addressed the nation that this was imminent and that he understood it was imminent. He switched from Ukrainian to Russian and pleaded with the Russian people to put pressure on their leader, Vladimir Putin, to call off this invasion. Obviously, they were unsuccessful as the Ukrainian capital and the rest of the country is under attack as we speak.
All right, Trey Yingst, new tonight, now morning there, that those air sirens are underway. We will check back with you, Trey. Thank you very much. And we're going to go to Kevin Corke because we are getting a lot of reaction here in Washington, Democrats, Republicans alike. The White House, we know that the president is going to be speaking to the American people sometime on Thursday about this after consulting with G7 allies. Kevin, what can you tell us tonight?
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting tomorrow. Meantime, Barack Obama, you may recall, said of Mitt Romney's suggestion back in 2012 that the Kremlin Kremlin was America's #1 enemy. Well, and he also added that the 1980s called they want their foreign policy back. Well, Joe Biden at the time said that we were mired in a Cold War mindset, if you're listening to Mitt Romney. Hillary Clinton said his thinking was dated and looking backwards. And while it's arguable that China and not Russia was and is, in the mind of many analysts, a far greater threat, tonight it's Senator Romney taking a sharp punch at those who scoffed at his sentiments from back in those days in 2012. He said this in a statement, quote, "Putin's impunity predictably follows our tepid response to his previous horrors in Georgia and Crimea, our naive efforts at a one-sided reset and the short-sightedness of America first. The 80s called and we didn't answer." Meantime, this from another congressional leader, Marsha Blackburn. She said, "We pray for the people of Ukraine as they defend against Putin's attempt to rebuild the old Soviet Union. Biden must stand up to Putin and immediately levy severe sanctions against Russia, starting with removal from the SWIFT banking system. The USA stands with Ukraine." Interesting she mentions the SWIFT banking system. That's going to get a lot of play, not just tomorrow when the sun rises here in Washington, but throughout the week across the world as people try once again to rein in what appears to be an incredibly dangerous, possibly bloody rogue action by Russia's leader. Shannon?
All right, Kevin, thank you very much. We will come back to you for updates. And for now, we go back to the White House. Peter Doocy is standing by there. He's got some new information for us as this is playing out. What's happening, Peter?
And brand new, Shannon, I actually haven't had time to read this in full yet, but we just got a readout, basically a description of the contents of a call that just wrapped up with President Biden and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. So I'm going to read this to you now. President Zelensky reached out to me tonight, and we just finished speaking. I condemned this unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces. I briefed him on the steps we are taking to rally international condemnation, including tonight at the United Nations Security Council. He asked me to call on the leaders of the world to speak out clearly against President Putin's flagrant aggression and to stand with the people of Ukraine. Tomorrow, I will be meeting with the leaders of the G7 and the United States, and our allies and partners will be imposing severe sanctions on Russia. We will continue to provide support and assistance to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Now, even though the images that we have seen on our many different feeds that are coming in from Ukraine are very dramatic, especially given the buildup over the last couple of weeks with this, we are told that President Biden is not, under any circumstances, going to send American troops to Ukraine to fight Russians. Something else that was missing from that readout of the call is consistent with what a senior administration official told me tonight, and that is that President Biden and Zelensky tonight did not discuss what had been reported recently, which is that U.S. officials, according to some recent reports, were actively trying to figure out a way to convince Zelensky a good way to leave the country if this happens. That is all absent from the reporting. So for now, based on what we're getting from the White House, Zelensky is going to stay. That's also consistent with what he put out in that Instagram video. The president, in his statement about this call, also says that they will be imposing sanctions. I spoke to a White House official, a senior administration official tonight, and asked if, given what's going on tonight, tomorrow will be the rest of the sanctions, the full package. They've been saying that they were keeping some back just in case Putin did something really aggressive. And I'm told that tomorrow, whatever they announce will not be the full package, because with something like sanctions, you can always go and add more. But one of the things to be on the lookout for, because this senior administration official tells me there will be some significant ones in there, we should look to see if tomorrow is the day that the United States sanctions Vladimir Putin personally. That would basically isolate him financially from the entire rest of the world, and that is something that, as recently as this afternoon, Jen Psaki in the briefing room said is on the table. So sanctions have been the response so far. Putin was not deterred. He is continuing on the action that they have been warning about for weeks. We expect more sanctions tomorrow, and White House officials are betting that with the weight of the sanctions and the weight of the United States with European leaders behind them, Putin will back off. Shannon?
All right, Peter Doocy, Thank you very much. So we're going to check in now. Brett Baer is here with us as we digest all of this information in the days leading up to this. Now, here we are at this moment. I think you've got a couple nuggets for us, too.
We're just monitoring social media and all of these people weighing in from around the world. And you're getting a lot of interesting comments from Democrats, from Republicans on Capitol Hill, but world leaders as well. Just a little taste here. This is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez from New Jersey. This unprovoked attack has brought into sharp focus the need to expel the current Kremlin leadership from the international community. Today must mark a historical shift in how the world views and deals with the despot in Moscow. I mean, pretty clear there. Representatives Rogers, McCall, and Turner, those are the top Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee and Foreign Affairs and Intel committees. The last few hours have laid bare for the world to witness the true evil that is Vladimir Putin. Senator Mark Warner with the Intel Committee in the Senate from Virginia. The intelligence community deserves plaudits for the precision and timeliness of the intelligence surrounding Russia's invasion. Thanks to the IC, the Biden administration has been able to expose Putin's moves and motives ahead of time for the world to see. Just a couple more quickly. The foreign minister in Lithuania, and remember Lithuania is a NATO member, and he says, we in Lithuania know it very well that Ukraine is fighting not just for Ukraine, but for us in the region, Europe, and everyone in the democratic world. It is our obligation not to just punish Russia for its actions, but to help Ukraine with all and every means available now. And Boris Johnson in the UK just tweeted, I'm appalled by the horrific events in Ukraine. He's spoken to President Zelensky to discuss next steps. President Putin has chosen a path of bloodshed and destruction by launching this unprovoked attack on Ukraine. The UK and our allies will respond decisively. So that gives you a flavor, not only up on Capitol Hill, but around the world, of some of the reaction as this attack is ongoing.
And you mentioned that there was an Instagram video, a short video from President Zelensky that came out, and we're now getting, apparently he put out a written statement that mirrors what he said there. He said, our diplomats are informing the world about what is happening. Ukrainians will never give up their freedom and independence to anyone. Only we, all citizens of Ukraine, have been determining our future since 1991. But now the fate of not only our state is being decided, but also what life in Europe will be like. And we have to remember, this is playing out in a very real world way. As you said, people are going to die. Lives are going to be lost. There will be destruction. Europe is that much closer across the ocean to all of this. And there are very real implications of where we go from here, of where Europe goes from here. You heard the member of parliament that we had on from Ukraine, who said he doesn't think Putin is going to stop at Ukraine's borders, even if it is successful within Ukraine.
And that changes the dynamic again. Right now, it's one step at a time, and I think we're going to see some significant fighting if we're, I mean, just what Lucas Tomlinson reported about the Russian Marines landing in Odessa is really striking, and I think that you're going to start seeing a real move to the capital city. We should point out here in Washington, D.C., we're getting word that Ukrainians, don't know the numbers, are gathering in front of the Russian embassy in D.C. And remember, it's 12:17 in the morning here, and organizers are telling our folks that a big amount of the Ukrainian community in the U.S. gathering in front of the Russian embassy from different states now coming to Washington, D.C. We'll see how that develops. And lastly, the foreign minister from Ukraine, and again, I keep referencing that he was on set with a special report, but it was interesting to talk to him because in the commercial break, he said this is a really tense moment. Obviously for him as foreign minister, but for their country. And he was leaving to go to New York to the UN Security Council and then back to Kyiv. But he just puts out, the world must act immediately. The future of Europe and the world is at stake. To-do list: 1, devastating sanctions on Russia now, including SWIFT. 2, fully isolate Russia by all means in all formats. 3, weapons, equipment for Ukraine. 4, financial assistance. 5, humanitarian assistance. This is Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba of Ukraine, just putting that out. As Parliament is meeting and there is a state of martial law on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah, and that member that we talked to, that was one of the things he mentioned. He said to all of my Ukrainians in the U.S., we need you to do this. We need you to show up. We need you to contact your lawmakers, make your voices heard. And so them gathering here at the Russian embassy in D.C., I might have to swing by there on my way home in the middle of the night, see exactly what's going on there. But that's something he's called for, those who have a voice, who are free, who can try to influence policy here and around the world, to stand up for those who are still in their homeland there in Ukraine. We want to go back to Trey Yingst. He's been covering minute by minute the developments in Kyiv. He's there on the ground as the air raid sirens, I understand, Trey, continue.
That's exactly right. Over the past 5 minutes, we've heard the air raid sirens go off again in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Off in the distance, a small explosion. But this gives you a sense of how this is continuing at this hour. We do know Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has declared martial law across all of Ukraine. The mayor of Kyiv is asking residents to stay indoors at this hour. Just over the past hour, though, there's a big police station behind us, and we saw the parking lot fill up with cars, and police officers get out, and they're currently standing outside of the building. So martial law is in effect right now in Ukraine as the country braces for more Russian attacks. It's not just the capital, though. Other cities, as we've talked about, Kharkiv, Odessa, Mariupol, the list really goes on in terms of the different locations that are being targeted by the Russian military. This was the campaign, the worst case scenario that was talked about here in Ukraine, taking place right now. But again, the capital of Kyiv is under attack as we speak, and the explosions in the distance do continue. According to sources, we understand it is military infrastructure being targeted by the Russians as they launch this assault. Shannon?
All right, Trey, thank you very much. We will come back to you. Let's talk about what we know at this hour with the former White House Global Engagement Director under President Obama, Brett Bruen, National Security Analyst Rebecca Heinrichs, and retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Thank you all for being with us as we're watching history essentially play out here. Colonel, I want to start with you. I want to play something from Congressman Mike Gallagher talking to Harris Faulkner today. Here's what he said.
Thugs like Vladimir Putin are not going to be deterred solely by sternly worded statements and sanctions. We have to wake up, we have to step up, and we have to start projecting strength, or this is going to get much, much worse.
Lot to unpack there, but Colonel, let's talk about the new round potentially of sanctions, calls for the SWIFT banking, for Russia to be cut off from those things, from their oil and gas to be shut down. What will get Putin's attention, if anything, when it comes to sanctions?
Man, I tell you, no sanctions are going to get his attention. I mean, he's had this understood from day one. Probably, I bet more than a year ago is how long they've been planning this operation, and he already has that baked in. He knows he can handle that. He's got deals with China. He's got deals with Belarus. He's got large numbers of foreign reserves. He can weather this for a long time, and he knows that he has tools to play as well. Sanctions are not a one-way deal. They're not a cost-free option, and he knows that. But look, we have to be honest with ourselves here. There's a chance that this could have been averted a long time ago by just acknowledging reality that Ukraine is never coming in NATO. We knew that they weren't coming in NATO. That's the reason why we said we're not going to fight for them. We're not going to fight for them now or later. If we had taken Ukraine and NATO membership off the table, then there would have been a shot of actually avoiding this altogether. But instead, we kept saying, no, the door's open. Nobody's going to tell us not, but we're not going to fight for them. So now Ukraine is on their own. Nobody's fighting for them. And there was a chance to prevent this bloodshed, and we didn't even try it.
All right, here is a bit of Senator Lindsey Graham on with Jesse Waters just a couple hours ago.
Putin is kicking his ass in the Ukraine, and I will tell you this, Jesse, you're a good guy, but if we get screwed over in Ukraine, the world, and let Putin get away with it, China's going into Taiwan, and Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon. So one thing does lead to the other.
Rebecca, I want to get your thoughts on that idea.
No, I think that that's exactly right. I mean, I'm very concerned that if we don't actually implement hard, severe, and swift punishment now we're not talking about deterring Russia. Now we're talking about compelling Russia to stop what it's doing. And we have to actually exact a high price, not just to get Russia to stop, but to get the Chinese Communist Party to understand what the cost would be if they were to try something in their own area. And so I'm very concerned. You know, this is Vladimir Putin's fault, Shannon. This is not a failure of diplomacy on the part of the West. It's not a failure of diplomacy on our part. Diplomacy was tried during the Obama administration. Diplomacy was attempted during the Trump administration, although they had much tougher policies. And the Biden administration bent over backwards. This is a failure of taking the threat seriously. Vladimir Putin is dead serious about taking what he believes belongs to the Russian people. He's wrong about that, but unless there actually is something to stop him, to actually make him stop, I am fearful that this could spill out beyond Ukraine's borders. And if just a stray missile, that you can have the fog of war, go into a NATO ally country, then the United States is in a much bigger mess because we are obligated to come to the defense of that country. So this could actually get much, much worse, Shannon. Where is Joe Biden? He has been calling everything as it happens. He's got a sanctions package in place. We were promised severe and immediate sanctions. We should see our president this evening, Shannon.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see him in the morning after his discussion with G7 allies to announce what that next round will be. Brett, how concerned are you about that possibility that this slips beyond borders, whether intentionally or accidentally, and triggers an Article 5 obligation for NATO members?
Without question, and we heard from Vladimir Putin earlier this week that he views not just this as an issue of Russia and Ukraine, but in fact a much wider one that encompasses a number of the former Soviet republics. And that is why I agree with Rebecca. We have got to take aggressive action now, not only with economic sanctions. I disagree with my co-panelist because I believe there are ways to send a very clear message to Putin, especially on the home front, where he is weakest, that we are going to hit him where it hurts and that we will take serious action. And in addition, I think there are a number of steps militarily. You've heard it from the Ukrainians, you've heard it from some of the military analysts, that the United States and our allies can take to provide tactical support. We can provide logistical support and intelligence support to the Ukrainians so that they have a chance in this fight, especially as it becomes more of a resistance effort.
Short time ago, I spoke with a member of parliament there from Ukraine, Alexei Goncharenko, and the one thing he was adamantly asking and begging the U.S. for, he says, we know that you're not going to fight on the ground. We are the Ukrainian people. We will do that. We are willing to do that. He asked for a no-fly zone. Colonel, in what scenario ever could the U.S. be involved with something like that, if any?
No scenario, unless we want to go to war with Russia, and I mean an all-out war. Any kind of military engagement is going to escalate this beyond where it already is. And that's the reason why Biden is correct in saying we're not going to fight for them. That's the way all of NATO has said that, which is why I've continued to say it's important to notice this, that Putin has been saying for 15 years, no NATO on our borders with Ukraine. He said it in 2008 by invading part of Georgia, and he said it in 2014. And he said it again months before this, that this is his red line. He can discuss all kinds of things, but the one thing he cannot tolerate is NATO on his border. And now we see again, he's willing to use force for that. And if we want to escalate it, then that's where we need to go. But that's the worst thing for our interests, and we need to contain this and not escalate it to where we could get drawn into a war.
The AP polling, again, I want to cite to that. How big a role should the U.S. have in the Russia-Ukraine situation? Major role was 26%, and I got to confess that number is higher than I thought it would be. But 52% at least think we should have a minor role. So 78% think that we should have some minor or major role in this. 20% say no role. Rebecca, do those numbers surprise you? And what is the proper role of the U.S. here? Because that is hotly debated about what we should and should not be doing in this scenario.
Right. I actually think that 26% is a little bit higher than I thought, because you really haven't seen Biden officials make the case to the American people about what our interests really are. This is not just about these general ideas about international world order. None of that nonsense. What this is about is the United States engaging and leading our alliance architecture to deter aggression, to preserve the post-Cold War, the post-World War II order, and what the United States has done, which has been good for Americans. I mean, Shannon, in 2019, 2019, the United States invested $2.4 trillion in the European Union, in Europe. We have great economic interests there. We want these countries to flourish. We want democratic, self-governing countries to flourish. There's a great stake for the United States. And if we don't have peace in Europe, we are going to be in a major fix to be able to rally our allies to help us in a potential conflicts in the Pacific. So we have great American interest in not just, I'm not arguing that we should be doing anything, no fly zones or anything like that in Ukraine. We should be arming our Baltic allies and the Poles to the teeth, making sure that we send a clear message that NATO will not be subject of aggression, that we will respond, and that Vladimir Putin better keep his aims much more limited than what we think he might do in Ukraine, because again, we don't want to see this escalate beyond Ukraine's borders, and it certainly could. I don't think anybody truly knows at this point the end of where Vladimir Putin is willing to go.
Okay, panel, thank you very much for lending us some of your expertise as this continues to develop. We appreciate it very much.
You bet.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to check in with Brett Baer is here with us tonight. Quickly, I think you've got some things going on there as well.
Well, just the Ukrainian Interior Ministry is out with an early statement here saying that the state border of Ukraine was attacked by Russian troops. Again, this is Ukraine's Foreign Ministry, Interior Ministry rather, saying the state border of Ukraine was attacked by Russian troops from Russia and Belarus at about 5 a.m. their time. Attacks on border units, border patrols, and checkpoints are carried out with the use of artillery, heavy equipment, and small arms. Border guards and armed forces of Ukraine and National Guard of Ukraine are firing at the enemy. Casualties unknown, but they're saying dozens of casualties is the estimate so far with fighting along the border. And again, this is the border with Belarus. We've talked about how there could be this move from that side to try to get to the capital quickly on the ground. It appears that there is significant fighting, according to the Ukraine Interior Minister, along that border in the early morning hours. And obviously the airstrikes that we're seeing with our guys on the ground and the air sirens that are still going in Kyiv.
Yeah, and there had been concern in recent weeks about military exercises, about not only, one border that appeared to be a place where Putin was beefing up, but again, Belarus giving him multiple fronts potentially to push into Ukraine. And as you noted, our Lucas Tomlinson, reporting earlier tonight of, Russian military now showing up in Odessa by his reporting. So this is something clearly that is not just a one or two pinpoint prick strike in some of those separatist potential regions. This is something that is very broad against wide swaths of Ukraine, from what we can tell at this hour, Brett.
They list 6 cities, and our guys have been talking about that on the ground, but these are different regions, totally different. And remember, Ukraine is a massive country as far as miles. It's really big, and this is happening across the country.
So I want to check in with our team. I think that President Vladimir Zelensky there in the Ukraine put out a video on Instagram a little bit earlier tonight. I think that we've got that. Guys, let me know if we've got the English translation with it. If you can let me know, we will play that out when it is ready. In the meantime, while I wait for an answer on that, where essentially we can tell you in that video he does talk about martial law. I think we've got it. Let's play a little bit here. It's not very long.
President Putin оголосив проведення.
This morning, Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbass. Russia has carried out strikes on our military infrastructure and our border guards. Explosions were heard in many cities of Ukraine. We imposed martial law throughout Ukraine.
So, Brett, this is important because there was a lot made about top Afghan leaders fleeing when it looked like that country was falling apart. Zelensky, there was some criticism of him. He shouldn't go to Munich and be part of the security conference. But it looks like he's very much committed. His impassioned speech earlier tonight, this video, I'm here with you. The Ukrainian people are going to fight. It looks like he's staying put and says, he keeps encouraging them, saying we're ultimately going to win this. We are proud people and we're not going anywhere.
There was talk that there were some officials in our government that wanted to get Zelensky out to Poland or elsewhere. Remember, we moved our U.S. embassy from Kyiv, and our State Department officials are now over the border. But the parliament is still there. The president is still there. The foreign minister just flew back there. The cabinet is still holding national security meetings in the capital city, and they say they're going to fight to the end. If you talk to military strategists, they will say this is likely how this goes, that this is a first wave of air attack to go after air defenses and command and control nodes, and then the Russians, once they establish full air dominance, then this kind of second wave on the ground begins. And we may start seeing what we're hearing from the border making its way towards the capital city.
And kind of eerie to look at this live picture in Kyiv, knowing what is going on there, that there's morning traffic there. There are people moving about their lives and their business. Although we've seen on the major roadways out of the city, there is enormous traffic, and it looks like backups as people try to leave that area. Let me touch on another part of this. There's been another cyber attack. It hit Ukrainian banks and government websites Wednesday, a precursor to the military action that we have seen play out. And so this is something that we have been tracking. I think our Trace Gallagher may have more on that for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Shannon, you know, for weeks, military experts have been telling us exactly that. Any military attack would be preceded by cyber attacks, and that's really exactly what happened in Ukraine. The cyber intrusions are called DDoS attacks, and that's where the hackers kind of flood these networks and servers with mass amounts of traffic so nobody else can access them. The attacks have reportedly been focused on Ukrainian banks, along with some top government websites, including the Ukrainian parliament. Many cyber analysts believe Russia is sending a message of how they can, compromise Ukraine's infrastructure. But Ukraine had said that its own cyber experts were kind of pushing back, using other service providers to kind of prevent these DDoS attacks. And meantime, back here in the U.S., FBI cyber officials are warning that U.S. businesses and local governments should also be very mindful of potential ransomware attacks. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said earlier the FBI warning should not be misinterpreted as a threat. Listen to her.
There is no current threat as it relates to cyber here. The FBI and all of the agencies in the government always provide regular updates on what businesses and entities should do to prepare for the potential for. There is still no immediate specific threat.
But she's now getting some pushback because Rick Perry, the former energy secretary under President Trump and former Texas governor, says Jen Psaki's statement is, quote, a grand lie. Listen to him.
Anyone who is sitting at the White House, being the spokesperson for the President of the United States, and basically saying that there is no threat for cybersecurity, needs to step away from the microphone and quit doing any more harm to America.
And we should also note that Russians have likely been behind previous attacks targeting U.S. pipelines. And since we're talking about energy, we should go back and note that Germany has frozen, as you mentioned earlier, Shannon, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That's the one that runs from Russia under the Baltic Sea to Germany, which would essentially double the gas exports to Europe. Nord Stream 2 wasn't expected to go online until later this year. So as far as right now, there's no huge energy loss, but Europe is already suffering an energy crisis. Gas prices 5 times higher this year than they were last year. And some experts believe that more sanctions on Russia could lead Vladimir Putin to turning down the spigot. And we're going to hear more about those sanctions coming up. And already the oil prices in Europe are close to $100 a barrel, the highest since 2014. We talk about crude in this country, $92, $93 a barrel. Gas prices across the country higher than ever before, especially in California, where you're seeing a lot of $6 a gallon gas stations. So we'll keep our eyes on how the markets react in the morning to what's happening in Kyiv right now, Shannon.
Yeah, no fun for you to fill up there in California and increasingly across the country. We know you're going to pick up special coverage in a little bit too, Trace. Thank you very much.
Sure.
For now, we're going to go back to Ukraine, check in with correspondent Steve Harrigan. He's on the ground in Kyiv, where his crew is hearing explosions increasingly within the last few minutes. Day is breaking there, Steve. What's the scene?
Shannon, we're watching cars drive out of Kyiv. A lot of people waiting until the last minute to leave, really not believing this could happen. It's a cloudy morning here. We've heard jets fly overhead, but we can't see them. We've also seen some helicopters fly. About 20 to 30 explosions over the past few hours, mostly to the southwest there. The Russians have said they are targeting military targets with precision weapons. It's likely they're trying to hit command and control centers here in the capital. two real big points to make. First, that Ukraine has vowed to fight, and they've declared martial law. And the other thing is Russian forces have crossed from Belarus into Ukraine. This has been a real concern. This is a most likely attack route to the capital. They're about 108 miles from where we're standing right now, so it's a quick 2-hour drive for those vehicles, armored vehicles, tanks, down pretty good highways. Are they coming for this capital? Is there going to be urban warfare in a city of 3 million? That's what we're waiting for this morning. Shannon, back to you.
All right, Steve Harrigan, thank you very much for being our eyes and ears there on the front line. Prayers for you and your crew, and to stay safe. Thank you, Steve. All right, Brett, interesting that something that you touched on earlier, Putin may have some unintended consequences. I mean, he's certainly going to in some respects. But this idea that we continue to get these statements from NATO and across Europe and many countries absolutely condemning everything that he's doing, bolstering and strengthening their alliances, saying we stand stronger together than we ever have before. Is there a potential that some of this actually creates backlash for him?
At home, yeah, it's possible. And if they feel pain, especially from sanctions, the Russian people will feel pain. Right now, he is convinced them on a national effort that Ukraine is a threat to them, and the current state is what his speech was, and also history essentially forces them to act to take back territory that was once theirs, is how he pitched it. I do think that, I've been to Ukraine several times. I've talked to Ukrainians here and there. There is this pride and this feeling of defending the homeland. It's a young country, but it is one that is very full of pride about defending the country. So it could get really, really messy if this continues on as we think, and Russian troops try to make their way to the capital city to take over. There will be a lot of fighting, and this could turn into a giant insurgency. And if it does, the world powers that support Ukraine are going to be funneling in money and weapons and whatever else to support them, and suddenly Ukraine becomes Afghanistan for Russia in the 1980s, where it was really ugly for Russia to the point where they eventually had to leave Afghanistan with their tail between their legs, and a lot of death and destruction. Who knows how this is going to unfold, but if the early hours are any indication, he's choosing the big enchilada. He's choosing the big move, and that's going to take some time.
Yeah, I want to point people back to this if they missed some of the coverage earlier. The UN Security Council has been having these emergency meetings. Ukraine's ambassador there confronting his Russian counterpart, saying to him, call Putin, call the roll, stop aggression. There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, ambassador. And he essentially was challenging him, get on the phone right now and say you're not going to bomb these cities. Let's have that conversation. And it's one of those moments that plays out at the UN where it's beyond awkward. I mean, he is now talking about the lives of his people, and certainly the lives of the Russian people as well, going to be incredibly impacted on this by this, as you said, if it continues to play out as we expect.
Representative Claudia Tenney, Republican, tweeted out, Russia currently holds the presidency of the UN Security Council as it invades a sovereign country and needlessly provokes war. It serves on a body designed to uphold international peace and security. Let that sink in. This is exactly why people have lost faith in the United Nations. Again, Russia, the Federation of Russia, is the president of the UN Security Council. Mm-hmm. So when that exchange happens with the Ukrainian ambassador, the Russian ambassador pushes back and says, we're just trying to deal with the junta, he said, in Kyiv, and then he gavels the UN Security Council to an end and cuts it off, and all of the conversation ends because he has the gavel. As Russia is attacking Ukraine. It's pretty ironic.
It is, and it matters who is running the show on these things like the UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council they've got there. I mean, sometimes we look at the membership of some of these bodies there at the UN and they raise eyebrows and a lot of questions, and tonight's going to be one of those nights. So this is coming in from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on Facebook. This is a post attributed to them. They talk about what's happening, the shelling that's been coming in. They say the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is fighting off the air attack of the tanker. They say the defense forces of the state are in full combat readiness, occupied and maintain defensive positions. The situation is under control. Then add this. They say the information about the paratrooping of Russian troops in Odessa is not true. That's been reported there on the ground, and say together we will win. We're going to be getting a lot of information from a lot of different sources.
And we have to be careful.
We do.
Our people on the ground had heard that the Marines, Russian Marines, had landed in Odessa. This is from the Ukrainian Defense Forces saying they are not seeing that. However, they also put out, the Interior Ministry, that hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers died in Russian airstrikes and missile attacks. That's quoting a senior official in the Wall Street Journal. This is the fog of war, the early hours. We don't have eyes in every place. So we have to be careful about how we report it, the caveats that we put on it. But clearly there is an invasion ongoing.
Yeah, and as you've had on Special Report, we aired the reporting as well. There were warned days in advance. There will be deepfakes that are very convincing, whether it's trying to make it look like a certain leader has said something, or what's happening in the streets and what's happening in these cities. And so everything has to be filtered, like you said, through that fog of war. Our reporters on the ground are excellent. There are eyes and ears, and this is unfolding overnight now into the early morning there as we watch and wait and continue to gather this information coming in. Brett, if you'll stick around, we want to check back in at the White House with Peter Doocy for any updates there. Hey, Peter.
And the latest update that we've got is that the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, have consulted with the head of NATO. And something stands out, and it's the first time that we've really heard about this tonight. They said, when talking to NATO, that they stressed the U.S.'s commitment to NATO's Article 5 is ironclad. And that means that their concern is not just about what's happening in Ukraine, because Ukraine's not part of NATO, but what's happening in the rest of Europe, these NATO members that border Ukraine. So the U.S. national security apparatus is already looking ahead to what could possibly come next if Putin takes over all of Ukraine, or at least gets a foothold there in Ukraine that could be threatening to NATO members, essentially threatening the rest of Western Europe. That is several steps down the road, but that is what U.S. leaders are talking to NATO about tonight. And it's been interesting being here at the White House much later than we usually are. When all of this started unfolding and these reports started coming in, we did not see something that we often see when there's a big meeting here, like a convoy of black Suburbans carrying different dignitaries, different secretaries, people that need to be here to talk to the president in person. Instead, we're told that the president got a briefing on a secure call from the national security apparatus, and then he also spoke to the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and the president says he called him. Zelensky, rather, called Biden. The details of that call were released a little while ago. President Biden says that he reiterated that the U.S. is going to announce new sanctions tomorrow. Earlier today, the White House did say they thought the first batch of sanctions had Putin improvising and adapting his approach, but they still expected an invasion at some point. And I'm told that tomorrow won't be the rest of the sanctions that are possible, but there will be some significant ones in there. More as we have it, Shannon.
Peter, let me ask you, do you have any sense of a time frame? We know the president wants to talk to his G7 allies and counterparts, but is going to speak to the American people. Any timing on that address to the nation?
Yes, we expect that to be right around noon. The virtual call with the G7 leaders is scheduled to be like something around 9 to 11 in the morning, and then at about noon is when they want the president to come out. But obviously, things are so fluid, and on a normal day, this president does tend to have things stack up and things slide a little bit or get rescheduled. But for now, noon.
Okay, Peter Doocy, thank you very much for all the updated information that flows in from the White House. Let's get some expert analysis now on how Wednesday's cyber attack on Ukraine set up Russia's actions tonight, and now the potential cyber threat we're facing here in the U.S. and other countries as well in their support of Ukraine. Former State Department senior advisor Morgan Wright is with us. Morgan, thank you for hanging with us so late. What's your assessment now? Because we've heard, listen, the attacks on the banks and those kinds of things were certainly disruptive, but now we may be talking about information infrastructure like utilities and other things that really keep basic life together there in these cities across Ukraine.
Yeah, hi, Shannon. No, hey, you guys are doing a great job here. The denial of service attacks were a distraction. They were designed to make you look one way. While I can tell you, Vladimir Putin, the Russian intelligence service, whether it's the SVR or the GRU, they have planted themselves inside Ukrainian networks for probably a long time. We know this because December 23rd, 2014 is when Ukraine voted to join NATO. December 23rd, 2015 is when the first black energy attack against Ukraine happened. They took out power to 750,000 homes. The Russian intelligence was inside the Ukrainian networks for 6 months, undetected. So the attacks you see are the denial of service attacks. The attacks we have yet to see, these are the ones that are under the cover. That's the ones that I'm very concerned about because, Shannon, if you want to bring a nation to its knees, you go after power, you go after water, and then you go after food. They're also going after banking, which causes panic and chaos. People are trying to leave the city. They can't get access to money. So this is part of not only the psychological part of an attack like this, but this is also designed to bring a nation to its knees.
So DHS Secretary Mayorkas tweeting this on Tuesday. He says, "We have no information to suggest a specific credible cyber threat against the U.S. homeland, but it is our responsibility to be prepared, and that's what we at DHS do." #ShieldsUp. How worried are you that Russia is going to turn its attention on the U.S. and other countries that are being very supportive of Ukraine in this moment?
One thing we can understand for sure right now is Vladimir Putin can't be trusted on anything he says. Whether the DHS Secretary Mayorkas says there's no credible threat, you have to operate right now because of a war footing that everybody is on, that there is a threat, that something is going on. Russia has demonstrated through its proxies that they have the ability and the desire to attack us. They go after, and they don't have to just go after us here. They can go after our interests or our partners in other parts of the world, places where we have a vital interest in. We have intelligence collection centers in Australia, Pine Gap. Those are very critical to us. It doesn't have to be an attack on the American homeland, but it can be an attack on American assets and capabilities around the world. But look, here's the one thing. You have to act as though you're about to be attacked right now with what's going on. You cannot take a breath and say, hey, we'll get to this tomorrow. No, right now, you need to be doing everything you possibly can do. You need to have everybody spun up, briefed, ready to go, because what Vladimir Putin chooses to do will be at a time and place of his choosing. And as we're seeing right now, he's doing everything he wants right now without being stopped. Cyber is the one area to where we can actually have an impact on his ability to get away with it.
So Politico's nightly email that came out late Wednesday has a quote from the Senate Intelligence Chairman, Democrat Mark Warner, says this: "Even a week or 10 days ago, I was still concerned that American and Western assistance to the Ukrainian governmental and private sector in cyber was still not being fully received. I think it's gotten better." He says, "I don't know specifics, but I think they clearly started to utilize some of those because they've been able to get a lot of these from the private sector, at least, operations back up and operating quickly within hours." What do you make of that assessment?
I think they may be referring to the NATO Center for Cyber Security and Center of Excellence over in Estonia. Because remember, Estonia had their problems with Russia when Russia took them completely offline. So Estonia has been a very vital part in creating this new cyber center that NATO is a part of. Ukraine tried to join it, and just like with NATO, they weren't allowed to join it, but they are receiving the benefits of advanced technology, advanced tactics that are allowing them to deflect these attacks. So my personal belief is I have no doubt they're getting some kind of help from NATO through this center in Estonia.
All right, Morgan Wright, thank you very much for that part of this puzzle piece, the cyber, which is clearly in 2022 something that plays a big role. Morgan, thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, I want to check back in with Lucas Tomlinson on the ground in Lviv. We have had Lucas, Trey Yingst reporting in Kyiv about air sirens there. Is that something that you're experiencing as well?
That's right, Shannon. Just in the last few minutes, we heard air raid sirens here in Lviv, about 6 hours west of the Ukrainian capital, where Trey is. We're located about 40 miles east of the border with Poland. I'm not sure if it was a test, not sure if there was any Russian air activity. We have not seen any Russian fighter jets or bombers so far. This city, which they call the cultural capital of Ukraine, has not been struck, at least not that we could tell. Life is kind of returning to normal here, believe it or not. The traffic looks pretty full out here. Obviously, it's dawn is broke, but far different scene, of course, north of Ukraine's capital, where rows and rows of Russian armored personnel carriers are making that trip into Ukraine. As Steve Harrigan said, it's about a 2-hour drive. I spent some time up near Chernobyl a few weeks ago to see the Ukrainian forces, and it is, quick shot, 2-hour drive from the border. And of course, that's where 30,000 Russian forces were training with the Belarus military. And of course, after that training was over, it was announced that they would stay. Now, we're just getting a new report from the Ukrainian military saying that Ukrainian air defenses shot down a Russian aircraft in eastern Ukraine. So that's on the other side of the country. Shannon, Ukraine is about the size of Texas. It's a very big country, at least by European standards. That's the latest here. Send it back to you.
All right, Lucas, we are very grateful for you and your crew there on the ground. Thank you very much for bringing us the latest. So bring back in Fox News chief political anchor and host of Special Report, Bret Baier, who is working 24 hours a day as we cover this. And already you're starting to see conversation about the Dow futures, the potential impact, oil prices per barrel, where we're now heading now that this has become a reality.
Yeah, and stocks are taking a big dive in the futures because of the uncertainty about what lies ahead. You'll see oil prices spike tomorrow, depending on where this goes. This is full-fledged fighting. You have now images surfacing online of tanks rolling in from Belarus, from the north, and going across that border. This is the darkest hour for Europe since World War II. It is the darkest moment for a dictator trying to take over another country. And what we're witnessing is the beginning of what likely will be significant fighting and significant death. And that's the big picture. And we can argue about the effect of sanctions before, what would have happened before, what should have been done. But Ukraine is where Ukraine is right now, and they're trying to hold on to their country and to their lives as these tanks and military personnel carriers and planes roll in to their country.
It was really difficult to hear from that member of parliament, the Ukrainian member of parliament that we had on earlier, Alexei Goncharenko, as he was there in his home in his city under attack, saying that they pledged they were going to go have this meeting at Parliament, that they weren't going to back down, that they were going to stick together, begging the world for help. Some things that the U.S. is not going to get involved with and can't grant, like we talked about, the no-fly zone that he was so adamant and passionate that he hoped that they would do. But some of these other measures that we've talked about, really cutting Russia off from the international banking system, their oil and gas. We wait for President Biden to speak on Thursday, after speaking with his G7 allies, and to the American people about just how far they're going to go. And they talk about having a number of tools in this bag that they can use against Russia. But the world tonight across the board saying it's got to be devastating, or the potential ripple effect and the messaging to other malign actors out there is going to be very clear.
Yeah, and some of that may affect other allies, which has always been a factor here. But right now, all of those allies are on the same sheet of music saying we're committed to standing with Ukraine. Senator Marco Rubio, who speaks a lot about this, has been speaking about Russia's actions, just tweeting out a minute ago, Ukraine is outgunned and outmanned, but they are brave and tough fighters. And as the world will soon learn, they have already inflicted damage on Russian invaders. Again, you heard from Lucas, the reporting from the Ukrainian ministry. It's also hitting the wires now that a Russian plane has been taken down by Ukrainian air defenses in the eastern part of the country. Again, these are all things that we want to confirm with our own people, but that's coming out from the Ukrainian defense ministry. And I think as you continue on into the hours here, you're going to be getting a lot of reports from a lot of different parts of the country about what has transpired.
And I do think at this moment there's a sense that it seems more broad than many expected Putin would go in this first wave. A number of cities involved, the coast allegedly involved, many regions there in Ukraine. And to recap for those who didn't see earlier, he had this speech tonight that we're told it appears there's some indication it may have been taped a couple of days ago. But he said a lot of things there about the fact that our analysis, meaning the Russia analysis, concluded that our confrontation with these Ukrainian forces is inevitable, suggesting that Ukraine had provoked this, that it was part of their, that they are at fault somehow, and also said those who would be tempted to intervene, Russia will respond immediately, and you will have consequences that you never have had before in your history. Putin is sounding exceptionally confident, and maybe a lot of that is bluster just as he leads his troops and tells them to go in and get this thing done. But he clearly seems to think he's got a position of leverage, of advantage right now on the world stage.
Well, he does militarily, 100%, and 190,000 troops positioned around that country, and we saw that build up over recent weeks. But it's significant, and it's probably 60, 70, almost 80% of the Russian forces along that border with Ukraine. It's going to be a test, though, for the inner city battles with Ukrainians who have been armed and are ready, they say, to defend their country. Putin has a vision. He has a vision for not only taking over the Soviet Union map, but also rejiggering the world order, where he and perhaps Chinese President Xi Jinping shake things up. We'll see if the U.S. and other allies stand up to that.